live and pre-recorded. This is the Red Ticket Blues Podcast. I am Brian Buckley. This is being recorded on January 5th, 2016. To hit the internets on January 6th, 2016. You can always listen to the show on iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, and YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at BrianBuck13 and at Red Ticket Blues. So I was lucky enough to speak to Troy Renck, who is the NFL and Denver Broncos beat writer for the Denver Post. We discussed the AFC West champions, road to get to the number one seed in the AFC, and obviously it was Peyton Manning heavy, obviously. HGH claims him being inserted into the lineup week 17 and going forward with the Broncos. So enough of me. Let's get to Troy. All right, so with us we have Troy Renck, who covers the NFL and Denver Broncos for the Denver Post. Troy, welcome to the Red Ticket Blues Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. I appreciate you being here. Before we get into the AFC West champion Denver Broncos, let's talk quickly about you. You are a Colorado man through and through. You've covered both the Rockies and the Broncos. How long have you had the Broncos beat for?
I covered the Broncos originally from 96 through 2000 at the Longmont Daily Times Call and then Broadband Sports. And then I was exclusively on Major League Baseball from 2001 until through spring training of 2014 with the Rockies and National MLB Baseball. So I've been back on the beat. This is my second year. First year as the lead guy on the beat. Very cool.
Very cool. I've had beat writers on the podcast that have covered both MLB and NFL, and I'm going to ask you the same question I've asked them. What do you like and dislike about the beat?
Well, baseball is my favorite sport. My sons play it year-round. I played it as long as I could. I coached it for years. My dad coached it. So I love baseball, but the schedule, the only issue with the Rockies were twofold. The schedule, it's just too long. I'm on the road 150 days a year for 15 straight years, where you get a Marriott Platinum for life, which is not exactly what I was a goal I sought when I got into journalism. Loved it, but the travel with my sons now in high school just prevented me from. I just missed too much. And football, the thing I loved about baseball is you build a camaraderie. You know the players. It's not like you hang out with them, but by the end of spring training, you know the players. And you have a good feel for the team, and they're accessible for 2.5 hours before every game. And you're really only limited in baseball by your imagination. I mean, if I want to write a story on best fielding third baseman, I know I'm going to get Arenado that day. I'm going to get the player in the opposing dugout, and then I'll call 2 or 3 GMs. And you can execute stories relatively quickly because of the information flow in baseball. Football, I love game day. I really like football. I didn't play it as long. So I see it in different terms than I did baseball. I love game day. The Broncos are the event in Colorado every time they play. The only downside about it, and there's obviously far less travel. The only downside is just the access to the players. It's made for TV. It's made for sound bites. Getting one-on-one and exclusive time with players, even at the Denver Post, I'm going to say it's difficult. It's just not a lot of time. And that part, so you are a little limited in the kind of stories you can execute. You really have to plan out ahead, which is different than baseball where you live day to day. So it is really different in that way. But, I'm very fortunate to cover the Broncos because nothing is more red here in the state of Colorado than Denver Broncos.
Well, then let's talk about those Broncos. The regular season's over and the playoffs are upon us. But the big question is for you, do you ever remember a quarterback controversy with a team that has the number one seed?
Yeah, I was trying to think about it the other day. The only kind of parallels you can draw with great teams that are dealing with this were in recent memory would be the 2001 Patriots with Bledsoe and
true.
Tom Brady, and Bledsoe came in the AFC Championship game, and in the week of the Super Bowl, Belichick gave Brady the job back. And then Hostetler and Phil Simms, when Hostetler went in for an injured Phil Simms got healthy, and Hostetler got to start in the Super Bowl when they beat the Bills. So there's some parallels there. It's a little different with Peyton Manning. With all due respect to Drew Bledsoe, who was huge in New England at the time, he's certainly not as accomplished as Peyton Manning. And there really isn't a controversy. It's hard to explain. When covering it from when it happened, Peyton had not been healthy enough to generate a controversy until last week. That was the first time they had to make a decision on whether or not he would start over Osweiler. And there was just trepidation on their part that, he's healthy enough to suit up? Is he healthy enough to play? And I think that's what allowed him to be that's why they went the avenue of making him a backup for the first time since he backed up Jerry Colquitt and Todd Helton in 1994 at Tennessee, his freshman season. But now I don't see it really as a controversy. I would be surprised if it's not Manning starting the playoff game based on how it finished. And I give Gary Kubiak a lot of credit how he's handled this. He gave confidence to Osweiler throughout, but he kept showing the respect, if not reverence at times, to Manning. So he never lost Manning. The fans all wanted him as soon as Brock made his debut. Bench Manning, bench Manning. But I kept writing, you don't make that decision while he's hurt. You don't have to. There's no reason to alienate him while he's clearly not going to play, because you had the feeling at some point they might need him. So I do think Kubiak has handled the situation, which is awkward and weird at times. I think he's handled it really well.
Last week was the first time, obviously, Peyton had even suited up since week 10. I mean, no one had a crystal ball in front of them, but was there a feeling around the stadium that maybe Manning would get into the game at a certain point?
No,
Okay.
There didn't. The only scenario in which I saw him playing was if they got ahead, 21-3 going into the fourth quarter type thing.
Okay.
No one saw him as a guy who was just going to come in and give him a spark. And I do think Gary Kubiak, he kind of denied this, but he learned from when they lost to the Chiefs with Manning, when the day Manning threw 4 picks, had the 0.0 quarterback rating. He let Manning go deep into that third quarter, and they were down 22-0. This one went to a similar point in the game. It was still third quarter, but they were down 13-7. And Gary Kubiak treated that game like a playoff game. So it didn't surprise me that he would go to Manning. It was just that the leash was so short on Osweiler. He was 14 of 22 for 232 yards, and he had 2 picks, neither of which were his fault. One, his arm got hit because the right tackle got smoked again, and one ball went through a receiver's hands that clearly should have been caught, and then he fumbled on a blind side where the tackle got burned. Maybe he held onto the ball too long. Okay, I'll give him that one. But he was like a pitcher who's throwing good, he's throwing well, and then the fielders behind him are committing errors. As a manager, you don't replace your entire infield. So Kubiak, the pitcher wears it in that situation. Hey, man, it's not really you, but I got to change this vibe. And I have not seen anything like it where a player jogged in an entire stadium. It went from buzzkill to hope, the Spinal Tap 11 within seconds of Manning jogging onto the field. It completely changed the mood of the stadium because he didn't do a lot. He was 5 for 9 for 69 yards, but he got him into better running plays, and that's part of what Peyton Manning gives you. But it totally changed the energy and vibe of the stadium, which in turn changed the vibe of the team. You could see them get this huge caffeinated lift of, oh my God, we got this. And can that keep being, can they repeat that again? I don't know. That might be a unique circumstance, but it was amazing how everything changed when Manning went into the game.
Osweiler seems to be handling all this well. I mean, he's in the middle of a national quarterback controversy, and he did the teammate thing, clapping for number 18, like you said, as he marched onto the field for a standing ovation. And you also mentioned Manning was, he's 5 for 9 for 69 yards. It wasn't like he lit it up. The running game took over, and he got lit up by defenders a few times. So are those details playing a factor in Gary Kubiak's decision on who starts on January 17th?
Yeah, I mean, I think Manning is the guy because his experience, and he can diagnose the defense. He's the maestro at the line of scrimmage, the maestro at the line of scrimmage. He can change plays more quickly than Brock can. He can change protection to prevent a sack more quickly than Brock can. He doesn't have Brock's physical skills at this point. I mean, and at times Peyton looks every bit of 39 when that Damian Square crushed him, the defensive end for the D tackle from the Chargers. I mean, there was you're wondering, man, is Manning going to get up?
Yeah, that was rough.
And he was slow. Right, he was slow to get up. So, what I think will figure in is this: Manning has experience, and everyone will bring up, yeah, he's got a lot of one and dones. I agree. I covered one last year, but part of the reason he has one and dones is because they win 12 games every year and they get playoff byes. So that you have to factor that in. But the one and done losses at home have really stung him and tainted his playoff resume. But he has experience. He can diagnose defenses. The only trepidation I would have, and not that they consult or care what I think, is that if you start Manning and he struggles and you go back to Brock, which clearly Kubiak's established that the leash is short, if you go back to Brock, it doesn't bring the same lift. I mean, in all due respect to Brock, he's not Manning coming off the bench. He's, they cheer for him and they look for a spark, but it's just totally different. He's like Derek Jeter when he came, he comes off the bench to pinch hit compared to, Stephen Drew or something. It's just not the same.
Oh, God.
So that's why that would be my only concern if I'm the Broncos is if Manning would completely buy in and they were robots. I think they're better suited for Brock to start and Manning to be the closer. It just doesn't work that way in football. I mean, and Manning finished, won the last game. I don't know if he can finish a full game. That's in the next step of this process. Can he get through a full game without the foot acting up? And if he can, he's the guy. But man, they've shown the leash is going to be short. So it's going to be fascinating if he's 4 for 12 with the pick and they're down 10-0 going into the second quarter. Is he going to the bench? I mean, that's kind of the precedent that's been established.
Troy, I'm a Yankee fan. You bring up Stephen Drew's name, you're just giving me nightmares. I don't know why you would do that to me. But
yeah, he had 17 home runs.
He did, but struggled to get over that 200. You're right, the 17 home runs were there. So you said that your decision would be Manning. I realize the Broncos obviously have a first-round bye. When does Kubiak make his decision? When do you think that's going to happen?
We anticipate it being Thursday. That's how he's handled this. Thursday's kind of their first work day leading into the playoffs. He's given them Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off, and then their first practice back when they reconvene is Thursday. And in the typical weeks, that was a Wednesday if they played on Sunday, and he would tell the team in that meeting. He would tell the quarterbacks in a prior meeting and then go right into the team meeting and say, hey, just so you know, Brock Osweiler's our guy or Peyton Manning's our guy, and we're moving forward. And by that, and I respect Kubiak for that. He's not the guy that leaks stuff to the national press. And the first one to know will be the quarterbacks, and the second people to know will be the teammates. That's how, and he's been very consistent in that. Again, that's what's helped Kubiak through what's a very awkward, delicate balance here. Is when you start leaking out who the quarterback is and you haven't talked to the quarterbacks, that's where you lose trust. He's been very transparent with those quarterbacks. So we expect, again, he hasn't said this, he said no timeline, but the expectation is that he'll tell the quarterbacks and the team on Thursday. I cannot imagine it would go later than Monday if he chose that, just because it creates a distraction from the media, really, that they don't need, of every question practically becoming a straw poll of who do you want quarterback and leading into a playoff game.
Yeah, we'll definitely be on the watch for that. Speaking of the media, last Sunday, Jim Nantz said he would not talk about the Peyton HGH allegations, but I think we at least need to mention it. I don't really want to debate the validity of the report, but do you feel as if this is a specter that hangs over this team and Manning on a day-to-day basis?
It really isn't. I've part of the coverage of the story the first few days, and then my colleague Nikki Javala has kind of taken the baton from there. It hasn't been because it's been viewed nationally as a little bit of a non-story. I thought Jim Nantz made a mistake. He should have just mentioned it. Just as ESPN did the previous week. The fact that he and Nantz share agents, it gets complicated and murky. They tried to, it's a non-story. Well, it isn't a non-story. You can just mention that, hey, here's this allegation was made, and Peyton denies it and said he's sick and disgusted by it and thinks the guy's a slapstick. Just say that. Otherwise, I don't think you can't pretend it doesn't exist. And we've had a story almost every day since it came out, and some part of it being the credibility of the report. Mainly our only issue was, without debating it, was just the report itself. It's an interesting topic, one that should be delved into by an investigative unit. Where it fell short for me was just on the Manning stuff. It felt like a rough draft, but you've got some information here, and okay, Ashley Manning received HGH, yet they're saying, well, we didn't insinuate Peyton did it. You would build your entire report around Manning, a global icon, over one source journalism. That's what surprised me. I kept waiting, having covered Balco and biogenesis when I was on the MLB beat, saying, okay, that's the report Saturday night, and then Sunday they're just going to be punching back in the face. We have documents, we have texts, we have checks. That's how everyone says it's just like biogenesis. No, it's not. Biogenesis, the co-founder, gave the reporter all the records. It was undeniable evidence. With Manning, it's, well, his wife got it, so draw your own conclusion. I'm like, that's how you're going to report on a global icon? That was what was bizarre about it. So here, locally, back to your question, I'm long-winded. it hasn't gained much traction because there really just hasn't been any smoking gun of, okay, there's this receipt or there's this video. Or it's just, it came up, Manning denied it, and they've kind of moved on.
You talk about the local perspective. I'll go to the other side here, Troy. I live in New England, and a lot of people, including the New England media and even national New England-y media, like Bill Simmons, have said the coverage of the allegations fails in comparison to Brady and DeflateGate. What's your take on that?
I understand that. I mean, I defended Brady throughout DeflateGate, not whether or not the PSI issue was just the protocol issue was violated. That this whole idea that Goodell's judge and jury is just so flawed, and they're looking into changing that structure. But Goodell, his missteps throughout the process didn't provide Brady with the proper due process that he deserved. Without getting into whether or not Brady was guilty or innocent. The difference, again, the fundamental difference, and I understand New England fans being upset about this. The fundamental difference is there was a Ted Wells report that laid it all out there. And whether you believe the report, believe it's flawed, which many do, they had text messages from these two guys, the equipment guys, connecting dots. With Manning, we have a shipment to his wife, and they're not denying it. So clearly he did it, obviously. That's what difference in the two reports is. One is, linking phone calls to Brady and these guys. They don't have any of that with Manning. I mean, it's just different in that regard. Although I do understand the frustration of New England fans is that the Brady thing took on a life of its own over, for me, what should have been a $25,000 fine. That they turned it into a scandal and it mushroomed into something that I never understood other than there's so many owners that want to stick it to the Patriots. And they begged and urged Goodell to go after the Patriots because of their past misdeeds. Otherwise, viewed in a vacuum, to go after the defending world champ over air pressure and balls, it never made sense, ever.
No.
But in context with the fact that so many owners are jealous and can't stand the Patriots, and Goodell works for all the owners, not just Kraft, that's why it became it just looked personal from jump from these other owners. And there's no personal issue. There's no owners involved in the Manning thing. It's apples and oranges. I get it, but it's just apples and oranges.
I think that's excellent analysis of that argument. Back to on the field issue. No secret, the strength of this team is defense. Key guys like safety Darien Stewart, outside linebacker Demarcus Ware, and cornerback Chris Harris, they're a little banged up. But what's their current status right now?
Well, I talked to Harris yesterday. He has a deep bone bruise in his shoulder. He'll play. They need him. He is so good, and he's one of the best corners in the league. He's so underrated still. But he'll play. He's going to probably be in some pain. Demarcus Ware hurt his left knee. We're not sure yet on him. We'll know more Thursday. He told teammates afterward he thought he would be okay, but obviously it bears watching at 33, coming off of back issues, missed 5 games. So that one is a concern clearly until we learn more. Darien Stewart's a hamstring. He'll be able to play, but the issue is can he get through a game, which he couldn't accomplish last week. TJ Ward's getting healthy. Their safety. They're going to be, for the most part, healthy. And Brandon Marshall, he made the smart decision. He tried to test a sprained ankle, and after 3 plays, the Chargers, he realized, hey, I'm not right. And rather than try to, be the guy and tough it out, he wisely stepped back because they need him too. On a defense with 4 Pro Bowlers, you can argue Marshall's their most valuable guy because he calls all the signals. He does so much stuff to keep them on track that goes unnoticed that he would be a big loss, as he was last year in the playoffs. He barely played, and that's part of the reason they got smoked by the Colts.
So, finally, looking forward to January 17th, the Broncos' first playoff game. Who do you think the best and worst opponents for the Broncos are?
Yeah, best would be the Texans because they match up well against them. I mean, their pass rush, I'm not sure if Manning gets through that game, but
that'd be scary.
They match up. Yeah, J.J. Watt's an animal, 17.5 sacks, and they've had issues against good pass rushers, namely Khalil Mack, but certainly, I would say that would be the first team you'd want to play, though, because Brian Hoyer just hasn't done it in the playoffs. I mean, you look at coaching quarterback, and they haven't done it. Their next team they'd play would be, my guess would be the Chiefs with Reed and Alex Smith. They're good. Alex Smith is, he's captain checkdown. He never makes mistakes. their defense is amazing, but you could always feel like you're in a game with them. The one team they don't match up particularly well with, even on the defensive side, are the Steelers. And the Steelers are dangerous just because of Roethlisberger, and Antonio Brown is the best player I've seen live this year. So that's always a concern. It's like playing LeBron. You know, he may have 4 guys around him that aren't any good, but when the other team has the best player on the planet, it just feels scary. Like that's kind of how it was last year with Andrew Luck. Everything looked like Denver was going to win, and I just kept saying, I think they're going to win, but they've got Andrew Luck who can make plays on his own. He can do things when you tackle him, and that Andrew Luck played the game of his life against them last year until this year when he played the game of his life and got hurt. But Roethlisberger's that same kind of guy. You know, he's that same kind of guy that's dangerous. But the fact that they played him only a month ago, I think, does help. They really have a feeling. I'm convinced that they would go to more zone coverage. They love man defense, but the expectation is they'll end up facing the Steelers. And if they do, I just think you'll see their defense adjust better. They're not going to try to go man on Antonio Brown. That did not work in any stretch of the imagination.
He's Troy Renck, covers the NFL and Denver Broncos for the Denver Post. You can follow him on Twitter at Troy Renck, R-E-N-C-K. Troy, thanks for being on the Red Ticket Blues podcast.
Hey, anytime. Appreciate the time.
So there you have it, Troy Renck of the Denver Post. I appreciate him coming on. A lot of great insight. He thinks Peyton Manning will be the starting quarterback going forward. Only time will tell. We'll have to see. He's probably right. But they play the games for a reason, right? Cliche City. You can always listen to the show on iTunes, TuneIn, Radio, Stitcher, YouTube, and follow me on Twitter at BrianBuck13. And like the show on Facebook, and remember to leave a review on your favorite podcasting venue. Happy Three Kings Day. I'm out of here.